Hey, let's chat about history like we're sharing some juicy gossip. And guess what? It's full of empires that conquered with armies, but only a few mastered the art of conquering minds. When we think about cruelty in the ancient world, our imagination usually runs to the Romans, the gladiator arenas, the crucifixions, the public slave auctions. Rome was brutal, no doubt about it. But if we turn our eyes eastward to the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire, we find something just as terrifying, maybe even worse. The Persians didn't always rely on chains and whips. Instead, they perfected psychological warfare, breaking enemies from the inside out. And the victims often weren't the soldiers or kings, but their wives, daughters, and families. This is where the story turns dark, very dark. When conquest wasn't about land, it was about souls. The Persian kings Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes were not just rulers. They called themselves King of Kings. Their authority had to be absolute, unquestioned, and eternal. That meant punishing enemies in ways that didn't just defeat them on the battlefield. No, the real punishment came after the war, when the dust settled. It was here, in the quiet moments after victory, that Persia delivered the cruelest blow, destroying the legacy, pride, and dignity of their enemies. Let's break it down. The ultimate humiliation, the royal harem. Imagine being a queen, a princess, the wife of a king. You've lived your life in palaces, dressed in silks, surrounded by power. Then suddenly, your kingdom falls, your husband is dragged away in chains, and you? You're taken not to be sold like a Roman slave, but into the harem of the Persian king. It sounds like luxury, right? Gold, servants, rich food. But don't be fooled. The harem was not a paradise. It was a gilded prison. You could never leave. You were constantly watched. You existed only as a living trophy, a reminder to everyone that the King of Kings had defeated your family and now owned everything you once represented. The symbolism was brutal. By taking the wives and daughters of defeated rulers, the Persian king was saying, "Your dynasty is mine. Your future is mine. Even your bloodline belongs to me now." And sometimes these women weren't just trophies, they were pawns. Their children, half Persian, half royal, could be used as puppet rulers in their conquered homelands. It was the perfect way to erase one dynasty and replace it with another. Case study. The fall of Babylon, 539 BC. When Cyrus the Great captured Babylon, the last king Nabonidus was taken prisoner. While sources differ, it is believed his royal family, including his wife and daughters, were absorbed into Cyrus's court. The message was loud and clear. Babylon's royal line was gone. Its women now lived under the shadow of Persia. If the harem was the cage, mutilation was the knife. The Persians knew that nothing crushed the spirit of a rival family more than disfiguring its women. Beauty, status, identity, destroyed in one act. And history gives us one of the most horrifying stories ever told, the tale of Queen Amystress. Herodotus, the Greek historian, tells us about Xerxes I, the same Xerxes who fought the Spartans at Thermopylae. Xerxes had a wandering eye. He became obsessed with the wife of his brother, Macestes. When he couldn't seduce her, he instead married his son to her daughter, Artangte. But when Xerxes' own wife, Queen Amystress, found out about his desires, she was enraged. What happened next is chilling. Amystress demanded that the Macestes wife be handed over to her. Then, in a calculated act of cruelty, she had the woman's nose, ears, lips, and breasts cut off. She sent the mutilated woman back to her husband, destroyed beyond recognition. This wasn't just personal revenge, it was symbolic annihilation. Amystress had erased the woman's identity, her beauty, her very humanity. Macestes tried to rebel in fury, but Xerxes crushed him and slaughtered his family. One act of mutilation led to the erasure of an entire bloodline. If the Persians wanted to make an example, they didn't do it quietly. They did it where the whole empire could see. Rebels, rival kings, traitors, they were often impaled or crucified. And it didn't stop there. Their wives and children were sometimes executed alongside them. Corpses were left to rot on stakes outside city gates. Roads were lined with impaled bodies as warnings. It was collective punishment on a terrifying scale. The Behistun inscription carved into a mountainside in Iran by Darius the Great. This massive monument doesn't just list his victories. It shows defeated kings tied and humiliated, some impaled, others awaiting execution. It wasn't just history, it was propaganda carved in stone. Anyone who saw it knew what awaited those who dared to resist. Why this was so devastating. The Romans turned people into property. The Persians went for something deeper. Their cruelty was about erasing identity, beauty, and bloodlines. Destroying beauty. By mutilating queens, they robbed societies of their most symbolic figures. A queen wasn't just a woman. She was the embodiment of grace, fertility, and dynasty. Destroy her, and you destroy hope. Ending dynasties. By placing defeated women in the harem, they ended royal lines and replaced them with their own. Future kings would carry Persian blood, not native blood. Spreading fear by punishing families, not just rulers. They made rebellion a generational death sentence. Who would rise up if it meant their children would suffer too? This was cruelty with a purpose, to make subjects obey out of sheer terror. If Rome was the empire of chains, Persia was the empire of shadows. Rome's slaves were sold in markets. Persia's queens were hidden in harems. Rome's victims were humiliated in arenas. Persia's were mutilated in palaces. Rome crucified rebels. Persia impaled entire families. Different methods, same result: absolute control. It's easy to see these stories as distant, almost mythical. But pause for a moment. Imagine the silence inside those palaces. Imagine a young princess who once dreamed of ruling her homeland, now locked in a Persian harem, never to see daylight again. Imagine a father forced to watch his mutilated wife stagger back to him. That's not just history. That's human tragedy at its rawest. The Persians may have built roads, palaces, and a vast empire that inspired awe. But beneath the marble and gold was a system of fear, one that crushed not only armies, but entire bloodlines. When we look back at ancient empires, it's tempting to admire their power and glory, but history also demands honesty. The Persians, like the Romans, used cruelty as a tool, yet theirs was not always about whips and chains. It was about psychological annihilation. By seizing wives, mutilating queens, and impaling families, they didn't just conquer people, they erased legacies. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. Not the sword on the battlefield, but the silent cruelty in the palace after the war. Because long after the blood dried, the fear remained. And that's why, even today, the Persian way of breaking enemies leaves us utterly speechless.